Good morning to each of you this morning. Thank you, John, for the worship time. I really appreciated "There is a Redeemer" that you opened with. That was my mom's favorite song. And it used to be more common of a song, but I always do this. I pick on John's age, but that's an older contemporary worship song. That was the song as a young, I don't know if you'd say edgy or rebel guy, that got my mom okay with contemporary Christian music. But it was one she loved. I'm trying to think of Steve Green, I think, wrote it, or he at least sang it. 11 years ago tomorrow will have been the anniversary that Mom died, was killed. For those of you that aren't familiar with the story, we were here in Canyon City getting ready for our wedding and staying at Chris and Ruth's place out along 123, I think it is. And that morning, it was a Tuesday morning, and we were exhausted. I was exhausted. We had come through a pretty stressful weekend as a couple. I think the closest time we got to actually breaking up was probably that weekend. I don't know why. I look back at that many times and wonder why it was wedding. How many of you, the wedding planning and everything was the most stressful time of the whole dating? And it was a quiet Tuesday morning, planning to have breakfast with Dad, and had gotten up, showered, gotten ready, went out. I'd gotten up a little early because of having breakfast, and went out to the living room and was having my devotional time, and Mom comes out. She was ready for the day and comes and sits down kind of catty corner across the living room from me in Chris and Ruth's basement area there, and already kind of feeling somewhat annoyed, can't you tell I'm here privately? And then she had the audacity in the middle of clearly meditating and reading or praying or something spiritual to ask me how Teresa and I are doing. And we had, just a couple days before, we had kind of just laid everything out for our family, both of our families, and just how we were struggling. And she was that type of person. She really cared about people. I don't remember what our conversation was, but I just remember feeling really annoyed that I'm here. It's a busy week. We can talk about this later. Isn't the thing that's going to be best for Teresa and I for me to connect with God? No, scoot. And I responded. It was fine, good. The night before, we had gone over everything with our coordinators, and time came, and I got in my car, went to breakfast with Dad, and she and some of the others were going to go shopping later on. And I remember breakfast with Dad feeling kind of annoyed a little bit. I don't know, I was just a grump. And got done with breakfast with Dad and dropped him off at Walmart, where Mom and the rest were going to meet up. And I went over to Lauren's house to work at something. I don't know what we were doing, folding programs or doing something. And was in the restroom, using the restroom, and got a text from my sister, Christy. It was please pray for us. We've been hit by a truck. And it was just kind of, the way it was worded was just, we come from LA. There's many fender benders that happen. It reminded me of hey, just had a fender bender. And so I don't know why, something inside of me kind of lurched a little bit, whoa, hit by a truck. because it's very common to be hit by something in LA, in the city. And so I called her instead of just texting back, and was talking with her, trying to figure out like what's going on, and get this picture slowly that there's a lot of people around, and Christopher's laying on a stretcher, mom's on a stretcher, not responding, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, this is way bigger than a fender bender. And clearly Christy's not very with it either. Like, to this day, we're not sure how she communicated, and I can't remember. She may have given the phone to somebody else that was there, but she had to know where they were at was kind of surprising, because we were able to figure out that it's the intersection 67 and 123 just down the road from Helmuth. And so Teresa and I hopped in the vehicle and ran to Walmart to pick up Dad and drive out to 67. And I remember coming up the hill to the stoplight there, and in my mind thinking like, what's going to happen here? Like, am I going to have to push Mom down the aisle for our wedding? And we get up to the intersection, and there's this, 97, 98 Dodge Ram that is kind of off in the ditch a little bit, facing the intersection, the front end totally smashed in. And there's a big crowd kind of out in the field a little ways, and realize, oh, that's our van out there. And we go out in the field, and there's Mom, and right away Christopher kind of jumped out because he had a neck brace on, and they were putting him into the ambulance at the time, and Mom is over, she's laying, doesn't look that bad, but not really responding either. Dad immediately went over to her, and the rest of us went to Christy and Christopher and figuring out what's going on, what happened. There were a lot of medics around there soon. Life for Flight came and landed, and they take Mom and send her away on the flight. We decide who's going to go with the others into Canyon here and who's going to go up to the Springs. Me and Teresa and Dad and Lauren decided to go to the Springs, and spent like 45 minutes driving to the Springs, only to discover it's the wrong hospital. Go another 20, 25 minutes across town till we find the right hospital. And we get in the hospital, say we're here for Asher Witmer, and they kind of usher us into the quiet room. And again, I'm just thinking like, how does this change the wedding? Is Mom going to be in a wheelchair, Christopher in a neck brace, and then the doctor comes in with the chaplain. And that's kind of when it slowly begins to dawn that like, oh, this is not quite normal. And the doctor talks about how she had extensive internal injuries, and within seconds of the helicopter lifting off the ground here in Penrose, her heart quit beating. And they spent 9 minutes to the Springs trying to revive her, but they never could. And she's gone. Yeah. Mom was probably thinking like, oh, here's my son. One last chance before he gets married, I can check in and see how he's doing. No longer is Mom going to be pushed down the aisle. She's not going to be there. No longer are we going to have good, fun times together and Mom be kind of the glue that kind of brings us in the middle of our debates and arguing and quiet down, can I talk? And then she shares something that is like, oh, yeah, that's a better way to look at it. instead, when we all get together, we're going to not like being together because that's the most vivid reminder that mom's not with us. No longer is dad not only not married to mom, but confusion happens and misunderstanding as he sorts through his emotions and we sort through ours, and we try to talk about what the future looks like. And relationships, probably the most painful thing in losing a loved one, has less to do with the loss of the loved one, as painful as that is, but how it changes the life that you're still living. Totally reshapes the way things are going. I knew at the time, as the months went on, that all I wanted to do was sleep in. Like, I had a job that allowed me to be fairly flexible, but I would seriously wake up around 9:30 and just want to keep sleeping. Like, I had no desire to get up and start my day. And eventually, because I had to have my work done before 8:45 at night, eventually I'd get out, go to the warehouse, and I was managing the warehouse for Choice Books in LA at the time. And it wasn't until a year later, my brother and I got married 6 weeks apart from each other. And a year later, when they're celebrating their anniversary and sharing pictures and stuff of all the things that they did in the first few weeks of marriage, that it really hit me. Like, we didn't have that. My wife didn't have that. The joy of figuring out life together. It's only been recently that I've named that what I was going through was depression. Like, I think at the time it was just felt like a fog. And then our first child comes, and that instinct to, man, this child acts a lot like I did when I was young. How do I train them? How do I navigate them? Mom would know. When mom died, I felt at the time that I lost the one who understood me the most and could kind of talk about things. And even when your emotions are all worked up, like, she had an ability to kind of see through that and know what was actually going on. And one of the things that I remember most distinctly as a newlywed, trying to figure out how to establish a home and, what does it look like to lead your family, was every time I would go to read scripture or to pray, just felt like I was in an empty room, talking to a brick wall. There was nothing there, no response. And so the question arises, where is God? Where is God when life hurts? What is he doing in this moment, in the most devastating circumstance? And I don't know what you've been through in life. Like, maybe you've lost a loved one. Maybe you saw a loved one die slowly over a long period of time to cancer or some other medical sickness that you prayed for multiple times, and it seemed like God doesn't answer. And you wonder, where are you? Maybe you've experienced or witnessed someone close to you experience a life-altering injury that totally changes what you plan to do and enjoy doing for your life, and the anger that rises up as you can no longer do things that you used to do with ease. Or maybe you've experienced investing years into a child to only see them walk away when they become an adult and reject everything that you poured into them. Maybe you've experienced physical or emotional abuse that has caused tremendous disillusionment. Maybe it's come at the hands of people who claim to know God. And so when you think about God and attempt to pray to him, It either feels like an empty room, a brick wall, or just a dark, heavy cloud. Maybe you've experienced betrayal in a relationship or a sudden loss of a job, and all of a sudden you're in incredible financial need that you weren't planning to have. That's the thing about tragedy and devastation is you never plan for them. You're never expecting, even if you do plan for some kind of emergency, like a tragedy is a tragedy because the emergency happened in a way you weren't expecting. God is easy to trust in when you can see how he's going to take care of you. But in the moment of tragedy, you can't. And even though you know he does, whether you like it or not, there's going to be something deep in your soul that begins to question, how is this going to turn out? How is God actually good? Maybe you've experienced confusion in a relationship, in marriage. Maybe your marriage is slowly falling apart, or you've watched close friends' marriages just fall apart. And how, if God is a God of redemption, like why is it not working in this situation? Maybe your dreams have been shattered. You've experienced disappointment in life, unmet desires, failed ministry efforts or business ventures. Like there's all kinds of ways that we bump into a devastation or a tragedy in life. And sometimes with some of my friends who have lost relatives to cancer or something, like we'll get to talking and it's like, it's so different that I can't imagine watching someone slowly die. And it can be tempting sometimes to rate, or maybe somebody here is like, well, I never lost a loved one. And so, but you're thinking some questions and doubts, and it's like, well, I shouldn't be thinking that, or I shouldn't have that. But that's not the point. Like there is no point in rating your pain, because the thing about pain is it's the most devastating thing you've experienced at that time. And if you're following after God and you're being told about God's goodness and his trust, then it's going to, whether it's just simply the closest friend that you had decided they're going to have a different friend better than you, and that feeling that confusion and disillusionment, or maybe you've lost all of your family and you were majorly injured and now you can't do anything. Like whatever it is, you're going to face disillusionment in that moment, in those times. How many of you, just as a raise of hands, how many of you have experienced something in life where you wondered what God was doing? We've all been there. Sometimes in the church, we know the answers. And so we kind of quickly resolve the questions with what we know in our heads. Or maybe we don't even ask the question to begin with. My experience, and this is totally anecdotal, just my little life, but sometimes it's easier to help people who don't believe in God or aren't familiar with God yet. It's easier to get them over the hump of God's existence than it is for people who do believe in God to fully embrace the goodness of God and trust in God's existence. We know the answers. We know, you and I, we come in here, we're dressed well, we have smiles, we know how to put on an image that looks like we're doing well. But I've been in enough circumstances that my guess is there's probably at least half a dozen of us right now in this room really wrestling with deep questions about God and about life. And I don't say that as an indictment. I say that to acknowledge a reality that you and I will go through. You and I will experience. That's one of the things that it's so easy to give the right answer. It's so easy. One of the things that terrifies me about leading worship for Christians is that it's not that hard. It's pretty easy to make a really meaningful experience with a lot of people who know songs, who know how to sing, who love to sing, who want to follow God. But it's really hard to take that same kind of worshipful, kind of surrender to God, and attentive to the Holy Spirit, that same attitude and mindset, just make it one fluid motion into your private daily life at home and in the middle of circumstances where your impatience is running thin. Like, that's what's hard. And I want that all of my life, whether leading worship or tying shoes, getting people ready for church, like that's all done in the same worship and surrendered attentiveness to God. But sometimes we get so good at doing the thing we know how to do so well that it becomes a way of kind of staving off the deeper questions that are also underneath us. Some of the most raw questions about God that I've been presented with come from people who grew up in the church. How is God good when he allows car wrecks and death? Does God really exist? I don't see, if he's a God of redemption, I don't see that happening in my communities, in my relationships. Did I do something that caused this abuse, this betrayal, this failure? Would my wife be better off if she had married somebody else? Like, these are questions that we experience. These are questions that I have experienced. And so what I'm about to say, I'm not saying off the top of my head. I'm not trying to claim that I've experienced everything in life, but I know what it's like to be at really dark places of not wanting to live life. I know what it's like to wonder where God is, how anything good is going to come from this. I know what it's like to literally believe in my heart when somebody comes through a line to greet you and quotes Romans 8:28, God works all things together for good, to literally think in myself, that's not true. Because there's nothing as meaningful as it is to find out that mom's death caused people to take their life more seriously and return back to God. Like, that's great, but I know a lot of people who turn back to God without somebody dying. Like, that didn't have to happen. Mom's death didn't have to happen in order for somebody to get serious about life. So don't tell me that it's okay that mom died because God's going to use this for good. No, there's nothing good coming from this. Life is worse because mom is gone. And you and I experience all kinds of things in life where life is literally worse off. And sometimes we try to hold that reality at bay because we don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to answer. How do you engage life if, no, let's look at the hope. Let's look at what's going on. There is hope. There is an answer to where God is when life is really bad, when life hurts, when there is devastation. But we have to be real about that life is bad, that life is not as God originally intended. So what I'm about to say, this is the most compelling thing. I have tried sports. I love sports. I'm easily addicted to sports. I have tried entertainment. I love a good movie, a good band, something that quiets the noise in my mind. I have tried certain sexual pleasures. I know what it's like to be fulfilling the lust of my flesh in that way. But there's every single one of those leave me in emptiness eventually, because it doesn't do anything with this ache deep in my soul. And so what I'm about to tell you is not something that I'm just saying because this is the good answer. You all probably are familiar with these, but we jump to it so quickly without sitting in the lament and the grief of the reality that this is not how it should be. Paul says that creation groans as with giving birth, the birth of child pangs. Now, I don't know how many of you have seen a lady give birth, but it is the most, for me as a man, like the most frustrating experience because I can't do anything. She deeply wants to get this thing out, but it's really, really painful in the process. And we all are experiencing that in life, is there's something in the existence of creation that we desperately want gone. With a child, we're desperately wanting to see the life. But I think Paul's trying to get at the fact that there's something deep. We want to eject that out of our experience. But there's a lot of pain in the process. So where is God when life hurts and when we don't see hope? When all we see is brokenness? Where is God when our thoughts are just swarming us with darkness and suicidal ideation is flirting and lurking in the background of our minds? Is he present? Is he just a brick wall? Turn with me to Isaiah 53. As John read earlier, Isaiah 53 says, "Who has believed what he has heard from us? And to whom is the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of a dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him." As Isaiah speaks of the coming suffering servant, the Messiah that's to come, he's painting this picture that in the middle of the desert moment, in the middle of the dry ground, something is happening that we don't even notice. Where is God? Standing in the desert as this root is sprouting out of a dry ground. Where is God? In our moments of darkness and despair, God is there even when we don't recognize him. He was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And as one from whom men hid their faces. Now, I don't know how many of you have gone through something that when people ask you about it and you begin to share, you see in their face the fact that they don't know what to do with it. The conversation quickly changes. There's no follow-up question. They kind of cut it off and leave. I know what that's like. Have you guys had that experience where it's so difficult and dark, they hide their face from it? Jesus was despised and rejected, a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief, one that men hid their faces from. He was despised, we esteemed him not. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. And the context of this is that's literally Israel's thought. It was like, yes, he's a blasphemer, he's getting what he deserved. God is punishing him through them. So if you've gone through something where it's really, really difficult and dark, and somebody has insinuated or communicated the message that somehow God is punishing you, understand that this is something Jesus is very acquainted with, something he walked through as well. He was pierced for our transgressions. He was cursed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. His life was okay. His life was fine. But because of our sin and because of our lifestyle in rebellion, he was crushed. And the punishment that was brought on him allows us to experience peace. And with his wounds, we are healed. Through the wounding of Jesus, we can experience healing and redemption. If you want to, turn to Ezekiel 10, but I'm just going to fly through this a little bit. Ezekiel 10, 18, and 19. I love this picture because Israel, if you're familiar with the biblical story, obviously we get to Ezekiel, and it's towards the very end of Israel's walk with God. And God had told them from the very beginning that if you do well, if you obey me, you will inherit the land and you will experience blessing. But if you reject me and you follow after the other nations, then you will be consumed by the other nations and you will go into exile. And Israel's like, yay, let's follow God. And then they get hung up with the nations, and God comes and brings a judgment and warning, and they say, oh no, we want to follow you. And God says, well, you're going to fall away again. And they're like, no, we're really serious about following you. And that cycle just continues over and over as Israel continues to fall away. And finally, when we get to Ezekiel, the prophecy and the vision of Ezekiel is this final, okay, the consequences come. There is no option. There is no more, hey, if you obey me now, I'll avoid exile. There is only exile. Israel will experience the consequence of their sins throughout the generations. But in verse 18, the glory of the Lord went out from the threshold of the house, where the holy presence, where the glory of the Lord had dwelt and been present, and stood over the cherubim. Just before this section of the passage, it talked about the cherubim and a carrier thing that the cherubim are carrying. And so the presence of the Lord comes out of the threshold of the house and sits or stands in this, over the cherubim who are carrying this thing. And it says, the cherubim lifted their wings and mounted up from the earth before men's eyes as they went out, with the wheels beside them. And they stood at the entrance of the east gate of the house of the Lord. So they came out of the Holy of Holies, the presence of God came out of the Holy of Holies, stands over the chariots. The chariots lift him up and take him to the gate of the temple, of the house. And the glory of God of Israel was over them. So all before this, all up until now, the presence of God was in the Holy of Holies. But here's a vision where the presence of God is coming out of the Holy of Holies. Jump down to chapter 11, verse 22. Then the cherubim lifted up their wings with the wheels beside them, and the glory of God of Israel was over them. And the glory of the Lord went up from the midst of the city and stood on the mountain that is in the east side of the city. So now they're away from the temple. They're leaving the city on the east side of the city. There's a theme throughout the whole of Scripture that anything heading east is like good things do not come from that. And so Israel is getting ready to be taken captive into Babylon, and God is going with them. And the Spirit lifted me up and brought me in a vision by the Spirit of God into Chaldea to the exiles. So where is God? Even when we as creation, because of our sinfulness, as Paul talked about, so we're held in bondage to corruption and we're groaning and experiencing these childbirth-like pangs. Where is God in that moment as we experience this consequence of our sin? Yeah, we know that God has placed it into futility. It's going to waste away. There's going to come an end. But right now, in the moment of the groaning and the pain that we have to endure, where is God? His presence is right here with us in the middle of the exile. 2 Corinthians 4:16. We do not lose heart. Paul had just gotten done talking about our earthly houses, our earthly bodies, and how they're going to waste away. Though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For this light and momentary affliction. Again, don't skim over that. That's not Paul that's just totally unaware of the difficulties of life. This is the same Paul who's gone to prison many, many times. This is the same Paul who's experienced betrayal. This is the same Paul who's had shipwreck. This is the same Paul who went into the middle of a city, preached the gospel, got beat up, dragged out, left for dead, and stood up and went back into that same city. He knows what affliction is. He's not just saying this lightly. This light and momentary affliction. He's wording it that way to create emphasis about what's to come. So that's light, that's momentary. The darkness you're experiencing right now, the weight of having lost a loved one, the weight of the confusion of whatever circumstance is causing darkness right now, the things that you're feeling, as heavy and as grand as they are, is a light and momentary affliction that is working for us a far greater weight of glory. The weight of grief and pain, multiply that by 10, we will experience that. Beyond all comparison, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. The things we see now, they come and go. The circumstances changes, but the things that are unseen are fixed, eternal. Romans 8:22. Go ahead and turn there. We'll walk through this. Romans 8:22. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit, we groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for the adoption as sons. I have had conversations with people who wrestled with whether or not they were filled with the Spirit because of things that they were going through. Depression, constant struggle with habitual sin that they felt ensnared by, negative thoughts. And I think it's crucial that we remember in this life, even those of us with the first fruits of the Spirit are going to experience this groaning and the pain. Lost my place here. Groaning inwardly, waiting for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we are saved, the redemption of our bodies, that we are adopted, we will be redeemed as sons and daughters. Jump down to verse 26. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. So when you're in that moment and you don't know what to pray, you feel like you're in a room all alone and you feel like you're up against a brick wall, the Spirit is helping you. He's interceding on your behalf. Where is God when you feel all alone and don't know what to pray? He's right beside the throne of God. The Spirit is right beside, praying for you, even when you don't know. He's groaning, too deep for words. I love that play on words that Paul gives. So as you are experiencing groaning in this creation, the Spirit of God is groaning for you in the presence of God. And he who searches hearts and knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. According to the will of God. What is God's will? Is it God's will that mom be killed 4 days before my wedding? Is it God's will that you experience betrayal, that you experience abuse, that you experience confusion, disappointment, and unmet desires? No, it is not God's will. These are the results of creation being held in bondage to corruption. What is God's will is that all things work together for good, for those who love God, for those who are called according to his purposes. I don't understand why God allows this process to happen, that we have to go through this groaning to begin with. But I know and cling to the fact that all things, even in the midst of this groaning, work together for good. And it will work together because the Spirit is interceding and praying for God's will to happen. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many. And those whom he predestined, he also called. Those whom he called, he justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified. I'm not going to try to do a theological analysis, deep dive on this, but put simply, when you and I hear the calling of the God on our lives and we respond to that, God justifies us. And as we continue to walk in the justification of God, he will glorify us. The same Spirit that raised Jesus from the dead is put within you and I. And we have a life that transcends the groaning of childbirth that we experience. So what shall we say? If God is for us, who can be against us? If he did not even spare his own son, he could have. There are many stories of origin in other religions where the gods create humans because they're to serve the gods, the deities. They are not in any way stepping in to help the humans out. If the humans mess things up and die, then they'll just start over. And I sometimes think, sometimes we can wonder, like, why does God threaten to destroy Israel? And then we have Moses who appeals on God's behalf. And it's like, well, thank God for Moses. If it wasn't for Moses, we would have all been wiped out, right? But I wonder if that's actually not a part of the whole process, that God is wanting to agitate within us how committed he is to his faithfulness. Because for his name, he did not destroy us. His creation was good, and he can redeem it, is redeeming it, will redeem it without destroying us. He does it through his Son. And so he lets his Son be taken as a sheep to the slaughter, because it's only in that way that we can experience the full redemption. He didn't spare his Son. Will he not also? He did not spare his own Son, but gave him for us all. So he gave his only Son for us. How will he not also with him graciously give us all things? Who shall bring any charge against God's elect? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? Jesus Christ is the one who died. More than that, he was raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of God? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? The worst thing that you've ever experienced and gone through in life, think about that. Put that in the front of your mind. And now think about the worst thing that you fear might happen in the future. None of those things can separate you from the love of God. For your sake, we are being killed all the day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor anything, nor depth, nor anything in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus. We've got to cling to that. Sometimes we can get so focused on the darkness around us, but that's not the hope. The hope is that none of that darkness in Christ can separate you from the love of God. But here's the thing that's really beautiful, because not only is God, he didn't just wipe us off, he's with us in the middle of our exilic experience on this creation that is in bondage to corruption and groaning with pain. He doesn't just say, hey, calm down. I'm here with you. Stop crying. I'm here. No, he's right there with us crying, but he's also doing something new. This isn't the end of the story. This is not how it was supposed to be, but neither is this where the story ends. Revelation 21. Verse 1. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, sometimes we can read Revelation and get caught up in trying to figure out the specifics. But Revelation, in all the things Revelation is doing, being prophecy, giving pastoral direction, Revelation is poetry, which means that the specifics have less of importance and more the whole picture as a whole, what's going on. And so what John is saying here, most assuredly, is that the current existence that we're experiencing passes away. And a new heaven where God dwells, the heavens are the place where God dwells, and earth where humanity dwells, is going to come and become one, where God is dwelling again with man. And Jerusalem, in Isaiah we read, Jerusalem is the place of rejoicing. So a new time and moment of rejoicing is going to come. God is going to inaugurate this existence that is no longer how it was designed. There is going to be a passing away of that, and God is going to bring it back to his original design. And there will be a new rejoicing coming down from God, prepared as a bride for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away." So the pain that we experience now, the groaning that we have internally, whatever it is, whatever is causing you to wrestle with, is God here? This is what we have to look forward to. Yes, God is here. He's present with me in the pain. But this isn't going to last. It's going to pass away. And all of this pain and mourning will one day be no more. And he who is seated on the throne said, "Behold, I am making all things new." All things new. Not just people new, not just souls new. I'm going to make all things new. Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of the water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son." So where is God when life hurts? Where is God when you feel disillusioned? When how you thought life was supposed to go as a disciple of Jesus isn't going quite like that? He's right there with you, walking with you in this time of pain and trial. But he is also accomplished something through his death and his resurrection that gives us the hope that this is all going to one day go away and everything will be made new. Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper during the Passover celebration. In Luke, I think it's 14, Luke 14, where we see the Lord's Supper being inaugurated. And he goes on after the Lord's Supper to be crucified and to rise again. Now, the Passover celebration was remembering how God had delivered them out of Egypt. So the Lord's Supper for us is a tangible tradition and rhythm of life to remember that we are going to be delivered from this world of corruption. That what we feel and taste and smell in this moment is not how it will always be. And so as we commune together, I invite us to meditate, taste the bread, see the brokenness of the bread. Let the juice wash over you. Because at the very least, this is an opportunity to feel multidimensionally again a reminder that God is with us and he has done something that will free us and liberate us from the bondage of corruption that we're experiencing right now. And so I invite the rest of the leadership team, if you guys want to come, as we share communion together. I don't know what that pain and difficult experience that you've been through is. I don't know what questions you're asking right now, what things that are causing on the brink of depression or in the middle of depression. But set all that aside for a moment here and let's worship God as we commemorate and remember and celebrate together. I think we're getting familiar with this, but just go ahead and come down the main aisle, fill up both lines, and then walk back out on the outside aisles. Go ahead, we'll start here with